All politics is identity politics. Welcome to Identity Politics, everyone. I'm Kevin DeAnna. You know, it's pretty crazy when you think about it sometimes, this whole idea of the nation state, the buildings and documents and bits of cloth that are considered sacred, that people would die for, these expensive and lethal militaries and all sorts of weapons that we have to pay for, the idea that the government, these random people who can't exercise power on their own, they don't have any force of personality or any ability to inflict violence personally, but somehow they get to command us whether we live or die. A person you don't know has total power over you because you didn't give them enough of your money. And I'm not going libertarian here. What I'm suggesting is that there's something unspoken that explains why we go along with this whole idea of the social contract. We say things like governments aren't legitimate without the consent of the governed, but obviously that's nonsense. Nobody since like the Mayflower Compact was sitting down together and coming up with an agreement that governs all of society. None of us signed some social contract. Few of us have any meaningful control over political decisions, less in an age of mass migration where a guy in Zimbabwe gets brought over just to disenfranchise you in your own country. So why do we go along with it? How does society not just crumble instantly? Because frankly, that would probably be more justified than what we're dealing with now. And the answer is I think we just have this residual belief that the country represents us. It's tribal, it's ethnic, it's irrational, but it's also necessary. I mean, what is a nation state? It's the political expression of a people. Especially when you don't have a monarchy or some traditionalist aristocracy, the people have to precede the state. Otherwise, it's meaningless to talk about self-government. And this is why Vivek Ramaswamy talking about dedication to principles like the rule of law, defining America, or Barack Obama saying things like government is the one thing we all have in common really missed the point. The government disappears tomorrow, DC sinks into the ocean, the nation still exists. The nation might even be stronger. America exists before the government. It's not dependent on it. This has to be true. Or the very idea of an American Revolution where you have a nation seeking independence makes no sense. And this is true in every Western country, in Italy, in Germany, in France. These things presuppose the existence of Italians, Germans, French. And at some level, we know this. When we talk about Americans or Germans or French people, there are the people who know that is their actual identity. And then there's the people who just live there. And you see this in the use of the term our communities, which is another way of saying there are groups of various foreigners who have been imported to be parasites in the homeland, but aren't part of it, know they aren't part of it, and mostly hate it. Look at how the use of this term has gone up over the last few years. The more often the word community is invoked, the less a real community actually exists. And I'm not even saying anything particularly clever, original, or new here. I mean, even liberal theorists, even the people who actually believe in liberal democracy, understand that the state needs an undemocratic root in order to keep it going. You can call it irrational, you can call it prejudiced, you can call it barbaric, but you need it. Because at some point, when there's a crisis, some people have to step up. Some people have to have loyalty you can take for granted. Some people have to just instinctively respond to the colors because they feel like this piece of cloth represents me and is actually worth dying for. And you can snicker at it and you can deconstruct it and whatever else. But first of all, everybody does have their piece of cloth that they're willing to die for. And second, if you don't, you're just going to get stomped by people who does. You're going to get stomped and ruled by people who still believes in themselves. And that's basically what's happening to the West now. The left opens the door, but who walks in are the right-wing blood and soil movements of other peoples. And you can call them our communities, but let's call them what they really are. They're colonies of foreigners in what used to be our country, and they are protected by what are essentially occupation governments. Dress it up however you want. That is the reality. Now, I'd like to tell you that if this goes on long enough, the system will collapse and we get to win and everything falls apart because we're so tough and strong and they're just libtards and we magically take power because we had the best argument or something. None of that is true. The fact is, the one thing that probably kept societies more or less from collapsing into total decadence was an external threat, conquest, war, foreign enemies showing up with guns. Filippo Marinetti said war is the world's only hygiene. Fine, kind of a nuts thing to say, especially around World War I, but there's something to it. There's something to the idea that just like individuals, nations and peoples always choose the easy way out. And when you don't have an external threat, when you don't have that direct threat, you basically choose death. though usually in slow motion through degeneracy, through sloth, through luxury. These things go away when there's a real threat. And by the way, rates of suicide, depression, the idea that you have no meaning in life, these things go away when there's a war too. Like the quickest way to prevent someone from committing suicide is to put a gun to their head.
You know what, Chelsea? I think you should jump.
I don't think I want to.
You don't want to? Why don't you show a little follow-through, Chelsea? Jump.
Please, I just want to get
I'm not
down.
suggesting anymore. Jump.
Dominique Venner, one of the great European patriots, wrote in a handbook for dissidents that the presence of war, even if only as a shadow, is what gives its society its meaning and poetry. This is what allows it to coalesce and maintain itself as something more than a shapeless mob, a people, a city, a nation. In other words, you basically need that external threat to define yourself. Of course, Venner would ultimately kill himself in the Cathedral of Notre Dame, and he did this because he said, I believe it necessary to sacrifice myself to break the lethargy that plagues us. I mean, how often in the right do we talk about waking up? This seems to be like a premise of the entire thing, that there is this threat and somehow people are asleep to it and we need to wake our people up. That's basically what the whole movement is about. But in Europe today, at least according to the leadership of the European Union and many nations, there is an external threat. And they are awake to it. And they're rallying people and they're saying, we got to get ready for war. There's a military challenge. All of society needs to mobilize. And some are even claiming that we're already at war. And it's time for the soft-spoiled youth to get ready for conscription and get ready to die in the trenches to defend freedom. And of course, what they're talking about is Russia. Now, the Russian invasion of Ukraine is one of the most divisive issues in the movement. Most of us probably just want it to end at this point. I think that's basically the Trump administration's position. Speaking for myself, I find that when a proponent for one side or the other is yelling at me about it, I tend to agree with the side that's opposing whoever spoke last. Russia is not some great traditionalist ally, nor is it the home of the alt-right international, as some claimed in the past. I think The Atlantic actually said that. And we all know that generally when you see a Ukrainian flag in somebody's username on X, you're about to hear one of the worst takes of your life. And there's an element here where it's like Schrodinger's Russia. Like everybody, including reportedly the American military, when this whole thing started, thought Ukraine was going to collapse just instantly. I think Russia did too, which is why it didn't just invade the disputed provinces. It went for Kiev directly, which gives the lie to the idea that, oh, we're just trying to protect the pro-Russian population in the East. But then it just drags on and on and on. And people were saying 2 more weeks, 2 more weeks, 2 more weeks. Here we are like 3 years later. And they still haven't occupied in full the 4 regions that they supposedly annexed. And we're on the brink of 2026. So you have to simultaneously believe, if you take all these threats seriously about how it's going to invade Europe and everything else, you have to believe this, that Russia is too weak, not just to conquer Ukraine, but to conquer part of Ukraine. And if you keep sending money and weapons, basically forever, Russia will just collapse. And by the way, it's also going to pay reparations. Europe just signed this huge deal where you give this giant loan to Ukraine. But don't worry, because Russia is going to pay back this giant loan in the future. Because obviously forcing the government to pay reparations after a failed war won't backfire at all. Like, you have to believe that. But at the same time, you also have to believe this, that Russia is going to conquer the Baltics, that it could handle Poland and Western Europe, and eventually even the United Kingdom. Like, what are we even talking about here? If it can't handle Eastern Ukraine, how is it going to attack NATO? When the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact were united, it didn't go after NATO, and NATO was smaller then. Does anyone take this seriously? But there are some arguments against Russia from the right, and one of the most compelling, I find, is that if you have this external threat from Russia, this provides the rationalization, maybe the excuse for Europe to rearm. You wake up Europe to the reality of war again, which means you revitalize the entire society. You have the redevelopment of industry, the redevelopment of a military culture, some semblance of belief in hierarchy and patriotism and everything else, maybe even a pan-European identity, which a lot of us want. Like, leaving aside if you want Ukraine to win because you want Ukraine to be independent, which is a very good reason, whatever the case of who's running it right now and where this is going, you still might want Ukraine to be independent, but there could be a higher thing here, which is like you're going to revitalize all of Europe. And I have some sympathy for this argument. But in recent days, we are seeing a lot more talk out of Europe about rearmament, conscription, war, but it's not being accompanied by anything like some rebirth of nationalism or patriotism. It's not even clear what people are supposed to be defending. Like right now, the European Union is fining Hungary for not accepting more non-European migrants. In almost every Western European country and the United Kingdom, criticizing immigration or protected classes too loudly will get you put in jail. In countries like Germany, there's open discussion of banning parties like the AfD because it's popular, because it might win the national election. The EU is attacking Elon Musk and American principles of free speech, characterizing free speech itself as a threat to democracy. It wasn't long ago that free speech was held to be inherent to democracy and what defines the free world. Now it's the problem. And it poisons every discussion we have about Western politics because even the term European Union misleads. Like, I actually have very little sympathy for people like Elon Musk and others saying we need to end the EU, we need countries to pull out of the EU. Generally speaking, most European voters do not want that. There's a lot of sense in the idea of a European bloc. You can disagree with me with that, fine. I mean, that's a legitimate debate, but it's a phony debate because what are we talking about here? The European Union is not some European superstate. The problem with the European Union is that it's an anti-European union. That's the issue. And you feel insane talking about this because you'll see people talking about we need to defend the European way of life. We need young people ready to sacrifice for Europe, give up their freedom to defend Europe. And then the same people will tell you you need unlimited non-white migrants to Europe. And it should be illegal to criticize this. And this is what defending Europe is all about. You can't even say you're defending freedom as such anymore. That's not even true. And you can't even blame this like, oh, well, it's all from World War II. Fine. Say what you will. I could say a lot. Say what you will about Charles de Gaulle or Winston Churchill during World War II, but neither of those guys said, you know what we need to do is we need to admit unlimited non-white migrants into our countries while fighting off a foreign invasion. In fact, both of them after the war were very explicit about not wanting that to happen. Churchill wanted to campaign on the slogan, keep England white. De Gaulle ditched Algeria because he didn't want too many Muslims in France. That's the reality. But here we are now. It's especially tiresome because I always try to invoke Churchill. Here we are now where they're calling for war. At the same time, they're calling for more non-white immigration. So what triggered this, there's this guy, Sir Richard Knighton, Chief Air Marshal of the United Kingdom. They always have these like very impressive titles. And he's trying to channel Churchill. And he says, we need to get ready for this giant war. Here's the speech.
Sons and daughters, colleagues, veterans will all have a part to play, to build, to serve, and if necessary, to fight.
One thing from the BBC that I thought was absolutely incredible. Chief of the Defense Staff, Air Chief Marshal Sir Richard Knighton said a whole of society response was needed, including an increase in regular forces, cadets, and reserves. Stop there. What does this mean? A whole of society response. I mean, again, they always go back to the World War II movie, right? What society? You still got the British stiff upper lip here. What exactly are you counting on here? The Muslims that are filling up the UK, most of whom are quite happy to tell you they're not British. They do not feel British. In fact, they hate Britain. These guys are going to help you? Last month, and he's not even being new here. This same guy had this to say not long ago. He said, the UK is not just the responsibility of the military alone. And this is from the article. Conservative leader Kemi Benedok said only 10% of those aged 18 to 28 would go to war for their country. Now, before we get into it, the fact that the Conservative Party leader is some random black woman may be part of the problem here. I mean, doesn't the spectacle of just this person, just like this picture, doesn't that self-discredit the entire idea that we need to fight for Britain? But let's get into the article here. Quote, the chief of Britain's armed forces said the nation's security is not the responsibility of the military alone. Air Chief Marshal Sir Richard Knighton, Chief of Defense Staff, said it was important for society to understand the stakes of maintaining the country's safety. Sir Richard's comments on Remembered Sunday were echoed by Conservative leader Kemi Benedok, who described it as tragic and concerning that many people no longer felt the call to serve their country, unquote, i.e. serve her. But here's the thing. Is it still their country? What does it mean to have a country? These are the questions we need to be asking ourselves. Because if you are white, especially in the Anglo world, if we define the country as the government, the state, your country hates you. This is all it does. It takes your money and tries to replace you. It doesn't even enforce the law. It lets criminals go if they attack you. Now, if we say your country is your nation and your people and your history and your identity, that's different. Then it's worth fighting for. But you might go to jail for saying something like that, especially in the United Kingdom. And when we say, oh, society, what do we even mean by society? The society where Parliament is discussing why we need to ban Andrew Tate or not criticize female politicians who presided over the grooming gang scandal because it hurt their feelings, or the people saying there's too much free speech online. What are we doing here? Who is this society? What freedoms are being protected? The question is actually very simple. What stake do actual British people, which means white people, have in the current British system? What are they supposed to be defending? This question needs to be answered, and it's not pro-Russian who asked this. And I'm not asking this rhetorically. I mean this very literally. What exactly would a hostile foreign occupation government do following a military conquest that is any different than what the British government is doing now to white people? And it's not just the UK. If you're talking about Europe, a country still in the EU anyway, you got to talk about Germany. Germany recently passed a bill to try to increase the size of its military. This headline is from the AP. Now, they stopped short of conscription. Why did they stop short of conscription? Probably because they wouldn't be able to pull it off without basically facing a revolt. So this article is from Al Jazeera. It's a cringe source, I know, but you saw it being reported everywhere. You already had a few thousand people protesting this conscription law, even though there was no conscription. Now, these were left-wing protesters, and people in the article were saying things like, oh, the government isn't doing enough for the climate or basic services or something. Like even German-style socialism isn't enough government spending. Fine. But what about the nationalists? Well, don't count on the nationalists rallying to the colors. The German military is currently investigating how the first stanza of the German anthem, which many of us know, Deutschland über alles, was played at a military event. This is a scandal. DW reports, investigation launched after Deutschland über alles played at military event. The German military is investigating why the controversial, to who, first verse of Deutschland's Lied, or Song of Germany, was played at the Christmas party in the eastern town of Diestlich. Officials said the first verse of the old Nazi-era anthem, it wasn't the old Nazi-era anthem, it was the anthem before that too, containing the words Deutschland über alles, was played instead of the official anthem. The line Deutschland über alles, or Germany above everything, was part of the anthem's lyrics, but was removed after World War II. The Nazi regime misused the verse to emphasize what they saw as Germany's superiority over other nations. Now, pause there. That's not actually true at all. The idea of Deutschland über alles was the idea that our German identity is more important than the religious divisions or the political divisions among the princes or all the political divisions you saw under the Holy Roman Empire and everything else. That was the idea. It wasn't Germany is better than everybody and everybody else sucks. In fact, if you're saying the Nazi regime misused the verse, you're admitting that. But somehow, again, at the same time, you have to believe that they're misusing this thing, but also we need to ban it because also they were correct at the same time. Back to the article. Today, only the third verse, where it says unity, the English translation is now unity and justice and freedom for the German fatherland, is used. The mix-up happened on December 11th at the Army NCO school, where a civilian DJ played the wrong version. The commander immediately ordered the correct anthem to be played and reported the incident. Now, Germany is in many ways the model for what they want to inflict on everybody, including the United States. The Washington Post even said this explicitly a few years ago. What happens in Germany? Your history is taught to you as something shameful. Any kind of patriotism is potentially far right, certain expressions, certain gestures, even the portrayal of certain figures, and we all know what they look like, is illegal. So, Hearts of Iron 4 here, are we supposed to believe that we don't know what the guy who led Germany in World War II looks like? And if they see his picture, they're just going to instantly recreate the Fourth Reich? What is the plan here? Is this going to stop people? Because the bigger question, at some level, if you're asking people to sacrifice for the country, to die for the country, even fulfill basic responsibilities to the country, you have to at least assure them that they have a country, that it's still theirs, that they have a stake in it. Like I've said, when it comes to white people in this country, it's not clear that that's true of white people in any European country, in any Western country, at least not in the view of our governments. They view us as an obstacle to be overcome, a population to be replaced, a problem to be solved. But if you are facing an external threat, even a rather underwhelming one, what I would consider modern Russia, who exactly is going to be manning the walls here? Like, what is the plan? This is one of those rare cases where you kind of wonder, is it just stupidity instead of malice? Because right now it appears that there really is no plan. Like Gallup did a big analysis only 2 years ago, and what they found was, quote, worldwide now there is a clear division between a global southeast and the global northwest in attitudes towards the readiness to fight for their country. While citizens of EU, 32% willing to fight, USA, 41% willing to fight, and Canada, 34% willing to fight, are much less willing to fight for their country if there was a war. People in West Asia, 77%, the Middle East, where tension is now high, 73%, in India, 76%, are much more ready to fight for their country if needed. The exception in Europe, where people express more willingness to personally defend their country if there was a war, are in those countries that are not part of the EU. Around 60% there say they are willing to fight, so basically former Warsaw Pact. In terms of individual countries, those most willing include Armenia, Saudi Arabia, Azerbaijan, Pakistan, and Georgia. Those least willing, answers no. Italy, 78% not willing to fight for their country. Austria, 62%. Germany, 57%. Nigeria, kind of out of nowhere, 54%. And Spain, 53%. Now again, the countries most willing to fight are hardly military powers, but it still matters. It tells you something in terms of how people feel about their country. The real question is this: why should Europeans, or Americans for that matter, feel like they have a stake in the wars that are being advocated for today? And the primary issue for most of these governments is to import almost unlimited numbers of non-white refugees. And these people aren't going to fight for the country either. And very few Europeans think these people are being successfully integrated. And why should they be? They're rewarded for not integrating. And I would argue it's basically impossible for them to integrate anyway. One can't be other than what one is. Do we even want them to integrate? Let's go further. Let's not just pick on the Europeans here. Let's talk about America. What was gained by the war in Afghanistan? It was America's longest war. Aside from the money spent, the lives lost, the main demographic consequences now, there are a lot more Afghans in the United States, and apparently we aren't allowed to remove them. Who got us into that? George W. Bush. What is the George W. Bush Presidential Center crying about right now? They recently put out a statement saying we must not ban Afghans from coming to the United States, despite the killing of a National Guard soldier by one. Why? Because we can improve vetting. But of course, the whole reason this guy was here was because he worked for the CIA and received asylum precisely because he was known to the United States. It's like Vivek Ramaswamy saying, oh, we need to define America by ideals. Well, can we deport people who don't believe in the ideals? No, we can't do that either. We need vetting, but the guy that our government worked with directly came here and killed one of our soldiers, and obviously we knew exactly who he was. Well, we just need to vet him better. What are we even talking about here? The point of saying these things is not to actually solve the problem. The point is to justify the continued flow of non-whites into this country. That seems to be the actual point for why we even fight these wars now. What seems to be the main result is an unlimited flow of people from these countries into our country. And then they hate our guts. And when something does happen, it's white people somehow who get the blame. So even if we had nothing to do with it, I mean, look at what just happened in Australia. You had this shooting by 2 ISIS supporters. How do we know they were ISIS supporters? Well, they had ISIS flags, 2 Muslims. What's the solution? Well, we need to ban guns. Oh, I thought Australia already banned guns. Well, we need to ban guns even more. Also, we need to crack down on the far right. Now, why did this shooting take place? If you've been following the nationalist movement in Australia recently, most of what the Australian government does is track the far right. Travel bans there are absolutely incredible. Guys are always getting put on trial for something they said or did. Doesn't matter. We're going to crack down on the white population even further. Even though we totally didn't stop this terrorist attack, we're just going to ignore the people who did it because our pets, the people we imported, launched an attack. But that's fine. The real problem is the far right. So this is happening right now. Reuters reports the Parliament of Australia's New South Wales state was recalled on Monday to vote on proposed new laws that would impose major curbs on firearm ownership, ban the display of terror symbols, and restrict protests, following the mass shooting on Sydney's Bondi Beach last week. The state parliament was recalled for 2 days to debate legislation which would cap the number of firearms a person can own at 4, or up to 10 for certain groups such as farmers. Although Australia has some of the toughest gun control laws in the world, after a 1996 shooting that killed 35 people, the Bondi shooting has highlighted what authorities say are gaps, and there are always gaps, because the gaps are the opportunities for authorities to expand their power. New South Wales, the most populous state, there is currently no limit to firearm ownership if the reason can be justified to police, and there are more than 70 people in the state who own more than 100 guns. A police firearms registry shows one license holder has 298 guns. Now again, notice how the reporters are very concerned about this guy. The people who actually shot, that's not really a big deal. I mean, none of this would have stopped the shooting, but it's an opportunity to crack down on these people. This is anarcho-tyranny in action. Back to the article. One of the alleged Bondi gunmen, Sajid Akrim, fine Australian name, 50, was shot dead by police and owned 6 firearms. His 24-year-old son, Naveed Akim, has been charged with 59 offenses, including murder and terrorism, according to police. The 2 alleged gunmen had planned the attack for several months and threw bombs at the crowd, though they did not detonate, Australian media reported, citing a police fact sheet released by an Australian court on Monday. Pictures in the police report showed the father and son allegedly training with firearms in an isolated rural part of New South Wales, Australia's most populous state, and which includes Sydney. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, I bet the authorities already knew who this guy was. Guess what? They did. They absolutely did. Financial Review, AFR.com, finds out. The shooting suspect was known to authorities. They're always known to authorities. Same thing with the Afghan here. Same thing when you see the attacks in the UK. They know who these people are. They can tell you every group they're in, everything they're up to. They're reading your emails. Like they have everything that we ever say. But somehow, over and over again, whoopsie daisy, they just couldn't have done it. Nobody could have predicted. But what we can do is make sure that we're spying on your Signal chats. We can make sure we ban your social media apps. We can make sure that, you appeared in a group with a guy, so we can ban your group. We can't stop these attacks. We know exactly who these people are. We're in contact with them half the time, but we can't stop them. But we can stop you. And I'll tell you why. Because no one wants to detain a brown person, regardless of what he's saying, regardless of whether he's calling for violence, regardless of whether he's obviously ready to blow. Same reason that we just let people who commit dozens of assaults in this country, we just let them go over and over and over again. Anarcho-tyranny makes sense. It is a logical thing for people who rule us to do because it lets them increase their own power at our expense. Violence by their brown pets does not threaten the system, even if it's against another protected class, as this shooting in Australia, which targeted Jews. That's even better because that's a greater excuse to crack down on the far right, because the far right might actually win the support of the actual country. I mean, look at the way the politicians are talking about this. So this is the Premier of New South Wales. He's out there explicitly saying that free speech and a multicultural society are incompatible.
There's been some that have been agitating in the Parliament to nullify the laws, to remove them off the statute books. Think about what kind of toxic message that would send to the New South Wales community. And I think the advocates for those changes need to explain, what do they want people to have the right to say? What kind of racist abuse do they want to see or be able to lawfully see on the streets of Sydney? I recognise, and I've fully said from the beginning, that we don't have the same freedom of speech laws that they have in the United States. And the reason for that is that we want to hold together our multicultural community and have people live in peace, free from the kind of vilification and hatred that we do see around the world.
Now, if you've been on X, you've probably seen that clip all over X right now. Here's the thing. He said that months ago. They already did this kind of stuff. Didn't prevent anything. I mean, this is from The Spectator in Australia in March. NSW Labour Premier Chris Minns has said something appalling. Whether or not it is true remains to be seen. Essentially, Minns has alleged that free speech must be sacrificed to keep the peace in multicultural Australia. It is implied that we cannot get along unless our words are constrained by the government. I recognize, and I fully said from the beginning, that we don't have the same freedom of speech laws that they have in the United States, and that the reason for that is we want to hold together a multicultural community and have people live in peace, unquote. So this had already happened. It didn't do any good. Now they're just doubling down on it. And of course, these laws aren't going to protect white people. They're not going to prevent you from being criticized. The premier is out there saying, oh, the Australian government failed Jews. We need to protect them. They're going to ban slogans like globalize the intifada, all this kind of stuff. But are you going to see bans on slogans like Australia is stolen land? Death to Australia. Watch out, whites. This is Aboriginal land. No. And we know this. Because the rule of law is not a thing. It's always just a question of who, whom.
And finally, on listing prohibited hate organisations. I've spoken before about my disgust for a very long time at organisations like Hizb ut-Tahrir and the National Socialist Network, otherwise known as the neo-Nazis. These organisations, for a long time, have been able to take hate right to the threshold without using the words violence and escape any further terrorist listing. We will be establishing a new form of listing for those who do not meet the terrorist organisations of being able to prescribe organisations. I'm asking my department, as the drafting is done, to check it against previous behaviour of Hizb ut-Tahrir and the National Socialist Network. Their behaviour needs to be unacceptable. Their behaviour needs to be unlawful. Their behaviour needs to be enough that we can prescribe the organisation and prohibit their activity in Australia.
No, yeah. Perfect response to a shooting by Muslims. And they're already moving to prescribe the so-called far right, but you know it won't stop there. It won't stop with the group they name here. There was a major demonstration against immigration not too long ago, and you know they're going to expand it to include everybody who participated in that, because the whole point is to expand what is not acceptable. The more you do that, the more power you have. It's obvious multiculturalism has failed from the perspective of the people, but it's succeeding from the point of view of the politicians. It's obvious the country is getting worse, but that was the idea. And the point is now to use this just as an excuse to punish the Australian people for noticing their decline.
And I was disturbed by some comments that were made earlier in this debate that seemed to suggest that the multicultural project is a failed project, and I utterly reject that. I think there's no question that we are still, despite Bondi, a incredibly successful multicultural society, and by and large Australians live together in peace and harmony and we get on despite our differences of ethnicity or faith. And I think it's a dangerous thing, it's a corrosive thing to try and encourage some kind of debate that says we should be rejecting multiculturalism. I'm not sure what that looks like in terms of the alternative. There's no going back. We are a multi-faith, multicultural society. There's no returning to a white Anglo-Saxon era. Those days have passed us. The only option for us is to actually find a way through where we get along, where we look after each other, where we express social solidarity, and we find strength in our differences.
So the point of the nation becomes just to endlessly war against its own past. I mean, Australia was explicitly started as a white country, white Australia. And now we're saying, well, that's evil. We can't go back to that under any circumstances, regardless how bad things are. Well, then why should anybody care about it? Why defend it? Why shouldn't whites just act like nons and just loot the place? And of course, all of this comes at a time when the United States is pressuring Australia to increase its defense budget. China criticized Australia just 2 months ago for moving ships through the Taiwan Strait, which they called a provocation. Australia will almost certainly get involved in any conflict if China goes into Taiwan. Who's going to fight for it? Like, he used to have a white Australia policy, and when it had that, you had a very strong military tradition, national pride. Now the government seems almost eager to crack down on its own people when it's not replacing them. How is the country to be sustained? Particularly when just about every public event in Australia begins with a ceremony saying the land begins to Aboriginals anyway, and so the entire country is illegitimate. So why defend something when it's fundamentally immoral that it even exists? Same could be said for Canada with the hysteria there over stolen land. But they somehow, they make these claims, but then they don't relinquish their power over us. This is what's so fascinating about it. It seems like the most anti-nationalist regimes and politicians, the most eager to replace their own people, are also like the most militaristic. And somehow they don't see how this could backfire. And even the people who I wouldn't consider to be like anti-nationalists, the same way the British government is, take President Donald Trump, there's an air of unreality to everything he's doing right now. So President Trump is out there. He's talking about building this new golden fleet. I suppose he's trying to ape Teddy Roosevelt, like the Great White Fleet. And there's going to be a Trump class of battleships now. They're not actually battleships. They're like destroyers, but who cares? And this was like the top story on Breitbart. It's going to be this amazing thing. It's going to project all this power. We're talking about getting Greenland again, and the EU is all mad. American empire is back on the menu, boys. Like this whole thing. It's not even that any of this stuff is inherently bad. It's not even that I'm opposed to it. And I think the instinctive hatred by progressives toward this kind of stuff comes from the link that they know is there between the historic American nation, which is to say white people, and the military. The same reason why you go to an anti-government protest, some of the most common flags you're going to see are Army, Navy, Marine Corps. Like, yeah, those are the servants of the state, but that's the wrong way to look at it. It's the institution that's most closely connected with the core idea of the nation, which is defined precisely by the difference between us and them, and the willpower to keep that distinction. But when you see all this stuff, we're going to build all these ships, we're going to have this great military, we're going to get new territory. Have you seen this country lately? Have you seen who lives in the major cities? Are those parts part of the country? I mean, forget conquering Greenland. Let's reconquer New York City. What is the point of any of this? What exactly will Europeans be defending from Russia? What will American empire be so great if it's just going to be filled with third worlders? How would a hostile occupation look different? What exactly makes Australia a free country when its leaders lecture its people about how they need to give up their basic freedoms to defend a multiculturalism that no one asked for and is in direct contradiction to the ideas the country was founded on? And what exactly do we, white Americans, get out of being citizens of the sole superpower? Do we get tribute? Do we get colonies we can go have adventures in? Do we get servants or something like that? No, we don't get any of that. In fact, the wars are an excuse to bring these people here, and then they get more power and privileges than we do, and live at our expense. The war is at home. Not to adopt like a victimhood narrative or whatever else, but we are in the position now of those non-white colonies who were asked to contribute troops to fight in World War I and World War II. We need to liberate our own homelands. And that requires an awareness of what the nation really is and what is worth defending. The nation is the people. It is not the government. It is the race. It is the culture. It is the ethnos. And those who rule us will not defend those things. Therefore, they should not be surprised no one is willing to defend them. And one of the most important ways we can build up our nation is having all white communities. Perhaps the most important right now is Return to the Land, which has been making headlines all year. Eric Orwoll leads the group, and he joins us now to talk about the latest developments. Check it out. Well, this guy's just been everywhere over the last year. Eric is the head of Return to the Land. Like I said, probably one of the most exciting projects that's come out of the movement in decades. And of course, when you succeed, the national media does not like it very much. And he's also been the subject of a lot of hit pieces, but I think he's handled himself really well in response. Eric, thank you so much for joining us. And I got to bring up, there was just another one, right? Channel 5 just went after you. But then again, I don't think it came off as all that negative.
Yeah, well, great to be with you, Kevin, and I appreciate the kind words. We've put in a lot of effort into the movement, and just busy day to day talking with all sorts of people on our side. And unfortunately, fortunately, sort of ambiguous, the media still. So the last 3 months, I've lost count. I mean, dozens of international outlets, local media, print media, TV. And I think the net effect has been overwhelmingly positive for us from our perspective. Yeah, we've made some new enemies, right? But those people who are watching CNN or whatnot, they were always going to be against us. Right. So the fact that they're aware of us, I see that as progress towards normalizing this discussion. So our goal in the next 3 years, before Trump's out of office, is to have this national conversation and hopefully set some kind of firm cultural and legal precedent. And if people don't know about it, then we've kind of wasted this opportunity that we only have in the next 3 years. The Channel 5 piece, I mean, Andrew Callahan, I kind of liked him. He was pretty friendly off camera and did indicate that he really understood why we were doing what we're doing. Part of that was the typical duplicitous journalist trying to gain
Right.
your trust and get you to say dumb things. But ultimately, yeah, he kind of made fun of us in various ways, but he really, I believe, humanized us and made it possible for people on the left to sympathize with our motives. A lot of these hit pieces used more like scary music in the background, cutting
Right,
between
right.
us and, Patriot Front marching or something like that. And, I appreciate Patriot Front and I actually approve of their optics. I think they're doing good work as well. But just drawing those associations and trying to make it seem like we're some kind of militant extremist group when really we're just a homesteading community. And I think this made it clear that we are homesteaders first, and the ideological stuff, that's just one among many reasons why we're actually doing this.
Well, you talked about, and I remember this from American Renaissance, where a group gave an excellent presentation. But one of the things that I was really fascinated by is the idea that you need to set a legal precedent, basically make this something that can be scalable, right? I mean, done all over the country, because obviously we have seen other groups try to do this and other groups do this, by which I mean members of other ethnic or religious or racial groups. And of course, nobody has a problem with it. Now that white people are trying to do it, now it's a problem. But there is a legal question in the air about whether you can do this, because on the one hand, there is a way to structure it where it fits the legal requirements. But on the other hand, there's still some uncertainty about how the courts are ultimately going to come down. Could you get into that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. Other groups do, in fact, have similar organizations. There's the Black, Indigenous, and Person of Color Intentional Community Council. There are like 30 communities listed on their website. So that's a similar organization that is ethnic and racial in character, and they're explicitly for creating intentional communities for their respective peoples. There are several Jewish groups for intentional communities, even in the U.S. Of course,
Right.
They have a whole nation state, by the way, that is an ethno state for them. They have intentional communities in Israel, all around the world. There are Jewish communities in Russia, but specifically in the US, they have really, in some sense, helped us set that precedent because they're doing exactly what we're trying to do. And there are actually white intentional communities in existence that have sort of flown under the radar over the years. But what we've done is try to do an out in the open and yet private strategy where we're not trying to get away with anything illegal. We simply looked at the laws that prohibit associations like ours in general, or discrimination in real estate, the Fair Housing Act, the Civil Rights Act, and we said, okay, how can we abide by these laws and also achieve our goal of having homogeneous communities for our people? So essentially, the rationale, the legal justification for the Civil Rights Act and Fair Housing Act is that one of the core functions of government is to secure access to public markets for its citizens. Many states, that's actually how they originated, like the Kievan Rus, right? Now, we did have Black citizens back then. We had non-white citizens. And that argument, I mean, it does kind of hold water. That's why this change was actually made. But the authors of those bills did have some foresight in that they put in specifically exceptions for private associations. The government has the obligation to secure access to public markets, but it doesn't have the right to tell private citizens what to do in our own free association, private associations. So the language of private associations is actually there, specifically carving out exceptions for discrimination law, Civil Rights Act, Fair Housing Act. So by being a private association and by being an intentional community and not just selling real estate on the public market, what we're doing is really in the private domain. And as long as we can justify that we are a private association and we're not just, doing real estate development by other means, I think we have a pretty good case because of these Jewish groups, non-white groups that are doing similar things. And that's the way it kind of went down after the Civil Rights Act. Various groups tried to reclassify as private associations so that they could continue running their businesses, et cetera, how they wanted and discriminating. And what the courts did was sort of systematically shoot down those attempts by saying, well, you're not a private club because you admit too many members, or too high of a proportion of members are admitted, or the classification is too broad. You're not specific enough in what you're about. And so all of this case law was built up in the 60s, 70s, 80s that now we can go back and reference. And so not only are we abiding by the Fair Housing Act, Civil Rights Act, but also all of the particular case law that tells us what is a bona fide private association. So that's the kind of meat and bones of the legal framework. The other part that really sets us apart is that we're not owning land as individuals. We're not selling land as individuals. We own our land together as a company. And it's a kind of middle ground between a full-on commune where it's collective ownership and then pure private ownership where discrimination in real estate would apply, and we couldn't do what we're doing. In the middle here, we each own respectively shares in our corporation, and those shares give us the right to homestead particular aspects of the company property. So it functions as private property, has all the incentives of private property, and yet is protected as a form of corporate ownership. And corporations and private contract, there is a ton of case law allowing them to do all sorts of things. So we've tried to structure in an intelligent way, and we're always developing. So currently, we are looking to shift from a straightforward PMA into a 501c8 fraternal benefit society, which is nonprofit. So that has tax benefits, and there are also things that kind of organization can do that a PMA isn't necessarily structured to do. A PMA is very, very broad. There isn't even a specific filing that you have to go through. You just have to kind of announce or declare that you are one, come up with a member agreement that members sign. There has to be some kind of dues paid. There are basic requirements that have been established by case law. But now we're shifting to a more specific kind of organizational structure that also has a good track record of allowing ethnic fraternities to maintain their own character. Like there are Ukrainian fraternal benefit societies that operate credit unions for ethnic Ukrainians in the US. And we're not the only people kind of pursuing that route. We've been networked with others who are using similar structures. And I think a lot of new opportunities, including financing opportunities that'll assist development of these communities, will be coming up in the next year or so.
Is anything moving toward an actual court case where you get definitive rulings on what the case law is going to be? Or is this just something that is probably going to happen in the future, but nothing's actually happened yet?
I think that no one currently has the incentive to bring us to court because Arkansas is a very conservative state.
What would they even sue for? Like, how would it even work, right?
Well, they would send someone to apply, and then we would reject them, and they would say that's illegitimate racial discrimination.
Right.
Politically, I know judges aren't technically supposed to be partisan, but effectively they are. And Arkansas is a very conservative state. They don't want to alienate themselves from their Republican base, many of whom are totally in favor of what we're doing. I've gotten stopped in Walmart several times and people want to shake my hand and they, thank me for what I'm doing. And then at the national level, why would Trump's DOJ risk, again, alienating the administration from the Republican base, many of whom are sympathetic. So until there is a shift in incentives, until Democrats stand to gain by attacking us, which they would, but we're not under the jurisdiction of any Democrat currently.
Right.
So it's sort of, I think it's a temporary situation. We are, under ongoing investigation, and currently they have requested documents in one of those investigations. So we'll see what comes of that. But I think if they were clever about it, they wouldn't just straightforwardly attack us for discrimination, where that would risk for them setting some kind of case law that is useful for us long run. Instead, they'll find some technicality or some other facet of what we're doing to to really try to nail
Yeah,
us.
yeah. I mean, because in some ways, like, you kind of want the legal thing, because then you get if you win, you get the precedent, you get the case law that settles it for all time. Whereas, if you didn't, on this form, you didn't pay the whatever fee, and so therefore we get to take all your stuff. I mean, that is how they would generally go about these things. I mean, but you haven't seen, I think it was the Attorney General of Arkansas, had all these media complaints, and they said he looked into it, and he said he did the kind of pro forma denunciations, but he said, yeah, but it complies with the law.
Right. And we've tried really hard to make that the case. Now, other people have said, you shouldn't be talking to the media. You should have done this much more low key. But by doing it out in the open, like that statement from the AG, and then the fact that they didn't find anything, that is setting a certain kind of precedent, even if just in the minds of people who might want to do this. For a long time, people have been afraid of forming communities like this for various reasons. I've been told that we're going to get Waco'd. I've been told the feds are going to come shut us down, or like somehow the Jews will come buy our land, like against our will.
Yeah, right.
So people are kind of paranoid about this, I think, because it has been programmed into people to associate intentional communities with either hippie communes or like far-right militias. And by being relatively ordinary people and going by the book and being under open scrutiny, I think we're really reassuring many Americans that, yeah, this is an option for you if you want to pursue it. And within our association, there are actually now multiple communities, and we don't talk about the others openly or where they are, but there are opportunities for people who want to move into a community and not be, in the public eye. On the other hand, there are still opportunities to move into the community in Arkansas. And, if you want to be a warrior for the cause in some sense, and also defend your family and provide like a safe community, I think that's a really good move. Not everyone can do it. Many people are under doxing threat.
Right.
But yeah, my phone is ringing.
That's all right. Well, one of the more interesting things that I've seen about all this is that whenever you have something that goes into the real world, where you're trying to have something concrete, you're not just doing an ideological group, and you get into the business of people's everyday lives in terms of making money, taking care of a family, and also just getting along on a person-to-person basis, a lot of the ideological precepts kind of break down. Theory is one thing, practice is another. What have been some of the challenges, which probably have very little to do with ideology or race even, that you found in trying to build this community, especially when you have people coming together to move into a place, and then you have to actually get along with these people?
Yeah, definitely. I would say the main hurdle has been more environmental than interpersonal. Arkansas is very, very hot in the summer, and a lot of people don't make it, despite being diehard for our people. They want to support a good cause. It's 100 degrees for a few days at 100% humidity, and they just break down. So, and in the early days, we didn't have AC, and many parts of this community aren't on the grid. So they're working with generators, solar, and it's pretty rudimentary in many cases because we can't finance construction. This was raw land 2 years ago. Many people try to attack us for that, but I mean, it's a homesteading community operating on our own budget with no financing. I'm pretty proud of what we've done in such a short period of time. But many people, they've never built anything with their hands. They've lived in cities their whole lives. They really don't understand what it looks like to develop from scratch. Now, future communities, there will be more of those options for financing. It'll be more centrally planned. And they'll probably look nicer ultimately. But yeah, the costs are a big thing. Like the road budget we set initially was way too low. And that's the cost of operating heavy equipment. That is loads and loads of gravel that have to be delivered continuously. We've had investment in stream crossings, and this area gets pretty bad flash floods. And so stream crossings have been washed out. We've had to get larger culverts. So, I mean, we've definitely, in some sense, wasted thousands of dollars in infrastructure that just wasn't the level that it needed to be. And we ended up spending more money with replacing that infrastructure. So we're learning as we go. That's probably the big thing. Interpersonally, I've really come to understand the whole dynamic that you see in a chimpanzee tribe, where there's the alpha, and then there's one or two beta chimps who are just always looking for the opportunity to edge in and take over. And, I'm fine if someone wants to step in and take over, honestly, if they do a good job. My goal is to forward the mission. If someone else being president contributes to that, I'm fine with it. But many people, it is an ego thing. And you do get these characters, they show up and they act like they want what's best for the association or the movement. And they have all of these criticisms and say, we should be doing this and this and this. But then you look at their track record and they haven't done anything themselves. This is concern trolling. And it's a behavior that now I'm very familiar with. So we're kind of like diagnosing these types in the chat. And we've written in preemptively policies in our member agreement saying this sort of thing is not okay. Or like back channel gossip was a big issue early on. And that seems like the kind of thing that might be difficult to rein in, but simply having the open conversation of why it is not a good thing for developing a positive social dynamic, that has effectively curtailed it. And it really isn't ethical. It happens, unregulated in social media generally, where someone will be attacked either legitimately or illegitimately. And in back channels, people will say, oh, don't associate with that person. They're a bad character. And that has real costs. So we saw a few cases like this where members were like ganged up on, or just, that sort of gossip, catty behavior that you would see in any church as well. Like I was a Catholic for a long time.
100%.
And Catholic churches, ironically, for being like Catholic universal, they are one of the most divided sectarian spaces that I've encountered, where you have these different cliques, and it's usually about some drama that happened years ago that the people involved just never got over. And now you have a group that sits on the right-hand side always of the church and never talks to people in the other clique. So it hasn't gotten that bad. And I think it's turning out to be a pretty positive movement. And for one that's not as openly political as, say, Patriot Front, it's a good middle ground where you can contribute to something and be positively affirmed by those around you, and like have meaningful economic opportunities even afforded. And yet it's still like for the cause. So I think the incentives are right. Just the goal that we're going for, like this is a fairly wholesome activity, homesteading, building families. We're not marching in the streets. Again, nothing against the people who want to do that, but I think it's attracting the right sort of person. But yeah, those are the big challenges, I guess, so far.
What would you characterize the average person who comes seeking membership in the association like? Is it mostly single people, married people, people with kids?
I think we're probably like 60% young-ish single men in our applicants, which you would predict. That's just the nature of these spaces. And then a lot of families. More often, the husband applies, sometimes the wife applies. And the families that come typically have more than the average number of kids. They're people who are concerned about the future of their kids. They're people who have had bad experiences in public school, or they've faced anti-white racism in employment. And yeah, they tend to be people who are very ideologically aligned. I would say we attract also a good number of people who are just skeptical of the establishment more broadly, even beyond the fact that it's anti-white. We attract preppers, which I'm fine with. I would much rather be prepared than unprepared. I don't want to live my whole life around it, but so self-reliant people. With the single men, a lot of it is guys in their early 20s to mid 20s who are looking to just go a different way in life. They want to kind of dedicate themselves to the cause. And those are the types that they'll often come out here. So even if you don't own a share in the company, you don't have like homesteading rights, we do let you camp if you're a member of the association. So a lot of the young guys have come out here and worked for a period of time, And those are the ones really, they either make it or they don't. And I think that's a healthy thing. And we've gotten some really high caliber, high quality people. Yeah, I mean, we have people who come in who are very resourced. We have business owners, we have, doctors, dentists, lawyers, all of that sort of stuff. And then we have people who are tradesmen and people who are just looking for new opportunities. And we try to keep an open mind, but we've definitely gotten more selective as time has gone on. And I think it's trending in the right direction.
About how many people is it at this point, if you can give that information?
Yeah, I think right now we're around 800. So pretty decent sized private club.
So with that, yeah, definitely. But with that level of people, I mean, so you talked about one of the big problems obviously being the infrastructure. And I know when you're working on land that's basically undeveloped, how many unexpected things crop up, shall we say. Mm-hmm. But I mean, now I guess you're at a point where you at least know what you're dealing with, right? And what are you trying to accomplish in terms of on the ground bricks and mortar infrastructure over the next 2 years? Because I think everybody concedes that it's been remarkable what's been accomplished in such a short amount of time. But where do you see it going 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? I mean, could this become essentially Irania?
Well, that would be awesome. I mean, they've been at it for 30 years. Right. And it is very, very impressive. It's a nice town, even by American standards. And you're talking about a third world country that is very, very poor. And even incomes in Irania are extremely low. You might expect to earn a weekly salary of $100 or less, even in Irania. So we have a lot of advantages over their situation. And yet they started out from something that was sort of a town. So the Orange River runs right next to Irania, and they built a dam in, I think, the 60s, back when it was a proper country. And they built this like housing quarters for the workers on the dam. And then when construction was done, there was no purpose for it. So it kind of laid idle for a while, and Irania bought that. So that gave them a big leg up. So when people, again, just setting the proper expectations in 30 years, starting with something that resembled a town, now they're what they are now, which is a town of like 3,000 people, bustling businesses. It's pretty impressive. I don't know if you've been out there.
Not yet.
It's definitely worth the trip. They're really intelligent people as well. Just the average person you meet there, you can have deep conversations. And they're definitely the pioneers in this space, and I absolutely defer to them. If there was an international leader of this sort of movement, it would be Irania. And I like you, Stridham. He's basically their PR guy, and he's very impressive. And I think if that's the caliber of individual that lifestyle produces, then we're on the right track. But anyway, in the next 20 to 30 years, I think the goal is to grow in number of communities. The depth of these communities, that's dependent on individual circumstances. So in some cases, you might have people with a background in real estate development that come to join a particular project, and they have it all mapped out, and they have the funds to allow for financing to members on an individual basis even. And there are situations like that currently cropping up. So I think within the next 2 years, there's going to be at least one community that resembles a suburban development, not quite at the scale of Irania, but conceivably a population of 500 to 600 people. And that one in particular is near enough to economic opportunities that I think a lot of people, when they learn about it, will jump on board. And the people involved have a background in real estate. They have relationships that are useful. So it's all kind of coming together in their particular case. And I'm really excited. Unfortunately, we can't show that off, because if we do,
I know what you mean.
Then there's the attention. But our community here, I mean, projects that are ongoing, we're building a little dry stacked wall up near the front. We have had a couple people drive by and shout things, not people from the immediate area, but from the nearest city. There was one black guy and his white girlfriend who drove by and screamed things at us. There was someone with purple hair, just the typical types you would expect to object. And we had kids playing outside, and they're screaming at our kids for no reason. It's really, this is the caliber of people we're dealing with. But so the wall, obviously, I don't want a situation where we get shot at or something from the road. And that's all I would expect. I mean, we're down a very long dirt road. Everyone on the road has guns and a backhoe. So, it would take basically a martyr, or a self-sacrificial official individual to try something. So that wall, we're doing a pond in the near future. So the way the land is laid out, there's this big central valley, and it would be easy to dam up one side of it. Well, relatively easy. It would still cost probably 10 grand at least. But that could be a 5-acre pond, which would increase the water table. Wells would never run dry. We've not had an issue with that. And this area gets a lot of rainfall, but just ecologically, it would make our whole setup more sustainable. We're like right now, I'm working on the foundation for my permanent house. This is like a small office building that I just had delivered. And then I put up or me and some of the guys put up the panels and try to make it look a little bit nice. I have like a storage building that was already here that I built first thing. So most of it is just developing individual homesteads. This community, the lot size is always going to be 3 acres. It's intended to be a rural community. That's what we want. The kind of people who come out here, we want a rural lifestyle. Many people don't. They want to live in a suburban or urban environment. I like seeing the stars. I like hearing cows in the distance. That's just what I personally am drawn to. So, but we are looking at acquiring land nearby. We have 1 acre on the river. A few of the members own some river land with a little cabin that really needs to be either rehabbed or torn down. But it's still a nice place to go. I mentioned it's very, very hot in the summer. So, it's turning out to be really rewarding on a personal level, and development is basically just hindered by finances and available labor. So if you're a young guy and you do want to contribute to something, there's ongoing construction. You can come down here and camp for free and work, either volunteer, or sometimes there are paid opportunities. But yeah, I wouldn't set your expectations super high for what this particular community will look like. Over time, hopefully people invest more in their homesteads. Like there's a lot of metal buildings. There's a lot of like simple cabins, smaller cabins, just because it costs. But this does have serious economic benefits in that we are kind of reinvesting in the community when we hire each other. If I pay a young guy to help out, well, then one day he's going to be able to build on his own lot. And that just increases the value for everyone of the whole enterprise. It's not about making money or building wealth first, but we've improved the value of this land considerably. And I think in investment terms, it's been a good investment for everyone involved.
One of the biggest problems when you have any kind of membership organization, association, really anything IRL, is infiltration, where you have people pretending to be something they're not, and then they come in and they screw everything up. Have you had to deal with that, and how do you guard against it?
Yeah, definitely. So the concern troll is one archetype of the infiltrator.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
definitely.
We've had people who were exposed to have some kind of leftist background, and we just try to do due diligence. And we have a lot of people in the chat who want to keep the culture positive and productive. So when there's questionable behavior, that's usually the red flag. You can't screen everyone up front. It's just not going to happen. So you need data security where members' information is not available to the entire membership, right? And we're building out our website with more security capacities. Currently, we are reliant on Telegram for our main chats because that's where everyone is, and getting someone to download a new app is like impossible for some reason. We started out on this open source like Discord clone called Gilded, and I actually liked the format there. But like I said, you can't get people to download new apps. So the website, I think, will be a big thing once it's able to facilitate like a matrix server that has Telegram integration. That's going to allow us to have actual physical servers where the membership information is stored. So, but yeah, you can't keep everyone out. We're getting better at identifying these kind of patterns and what is a good actor, a bad actor, just based on a 15-minute call. And then we've learned from other associations and organizations that also do vetting. So, Nova has done a lot of vetting work and they have a large vetting crew. We've spoken with their team that handles vetting. Patriot Front is really tight. They've had some leaks over the years, but very, very few considering the number of people who've been involved.
Yeah.
So we've spoken with their vetting coordinator, and we're just trying to develop those best practices. But the most important thing, and really our secretary, Peter Siri, had this insight from his experience running a community in South America before he came back up here. You have to structure things with a mind that you will have to kick people out. So it has to be very clear on what grounds people can be expelled. And we've kind of refined those criteria over the last 2 years. What are we looking for? What should be acceptable, unacceptable, so the back channel gossip or
Right.
Undisclosed political backgrounds, things like that. But yeah, I think collectively we're also kind of building a culture. Like I said, we have so many people who want this project to succeed that we're sort of learning together how to weed out bad actors.
Well, talk to me a little bit about the kind of culture that's being produced there. I mean, at this point, you have people who are coming there as individuals, and then a lot of people will say, I want to be part of a community. But of course, the theory and the practice are two different things. Some people might be disappointed. Some people might actually be overwhelmed by it and think this is like way better than anything I was expecting. Is there anything that surprised you about the way people have started acting together in terms of what they're producing, the sorts of cultural expressions or community life that's been developed, and where do you see it going over like the next 5-10 years?
Yeah, we have a lot of special interest groups and chats specifically for, like, for example, learning Anglo-Saxon, Old English. So that's one of the neat little projects. There are like crocheting groups for the women. There are homesteading chats where we talk about different construction methods and the benefits of this breed of chicken versus that breed of chicken. And we have a lot of people who are high IQ, maybe slightly on the autism spectrum, and they have this wealth of information that's really, really useful. So that's been the striking characteristic of the culture that's developing. It's really a culture of creators, people who want to build, who want to see like their vision realized, and in conventional, or rather unconventional and sustainable ways. So again, there's a big overlap with preppers. There are people who are into guns, although I wouldn't say, again, we are a militia or anything like that. It's just most of us own guns. We know how to shoot. We know, how to maintain our firearms. So it's really just like practical wisdom. It's a wealth of practical wisdom that's accumulated, and you can get hands-on instruction in a lot of things if you come down here. So we have 2 big events every year, April and October, and we'll have, first aid seminars. We'll have seminars on alternative communication technologies, or, right now we're working on a project for, I don't know if I can say too much about it, but a crypto-like vehicle for holding physical silver. So basically we'll have a vault of silver, and then we can exchange these claims on the silver using a crypto technology. Not a currency, but it'll give us something to store value in that I think will be attractive to the type of people that want to join RTTL. And there are a bunch of other projects that I'm, forgetting about currently, but yeah, we also have a lot of people who are musically inclined. So we've gotten together and like we sang Christmas carols. I'm sure we'll do that again on Christmas Eve. And we've had talent shows. So the big thing, it's people who want to create, who want to proactively make culture. It's people who are enthusiastic about our heritage. We have one guy who's like into medieval reenactment. He makes his own tents, his own clothing, and yeah, so it's just really refreshing, because that's not the environment that I was in at all growing up.
Right.
Everything, Southern California, everyone is hyper status conscious. Everyone wants a Tesla. It's not this, which I'm much more enthusiastic about.
In terms of the kids, obviously the big thing that I think a lot of people with small children are going to be thinking about is education. Are they going to have some sort of a social circle? Are they going to be normal is one of the things. I mean, I know a lot of people who wanted to homeschool their kids, and the thing that ultimately prevented them from doing it is they say, well, I want to send them to the public schools because I want them to like socialize appropriately. Of course, you know, what they teach in the public schools these days, I'm not sure that's the best thing. But this is something that I think a lot of people are going to be very concerned about. What's the approach to small kids, educating them? And have you guys like set up a kind of community school, or do you just send them to whatever the local public school is?
No, we're a homeschool or private school only community, so none of the kids here go to public school. However, you can send your kids to participate in a local public school sports program or music program. That happens all the time with homeschoolers. You can also find homeschool networks in just about every community out there. Like there's one town 30 minutes away, about 7,000 people. And there are several homeschool co-op networks there. So you can bring your kids and have them meet all sorts of people from the area. We have run a homeschool co-op here on the land. And the numbers really bear out that this isn't as much of a concern as you might think. A lot of us went through public school. We remember the friends we made. We remember, doing sports and all that. And that was something positive in our lives. And we're afraid of our kids missing out on that. But in terms of life outcomes, homeschoolers do better on standardized testing. They ultimately earn more than non-homeschooled kids. They have better college acceptance rates, graduation rates in college. So it really doesn't seem to hinder them from being successful in life. And maybe it is the case that there's something pathological about the typical public school environment beyond the ideology. Just the fact that you're surrounded by all and only people exactly your age, and that's who you interact with. And there are only a handful of adults who have their own views, and they're in this kind of odd position of authority. They're not your parent. And sometimes they go on these like personal rants about their own lives. And it's just, It's not a natural dynamic, but we're used to it. So it seems normal, but in the past you would socialize with people of all ages. Households tended to be multi-generational. You would interact with the elders of the community. You would interact with people younger than yourself. The old one-room schoolhouse model, you would have all ages in the classroom, and the mom in the community that served as the teacher would just be there to basically supervise and make sure that everyone was doing their appropriate work. But that's the traditional way, and I don't see any reason why we can't, to some extent, go back to that. So
that's a really interesting point about the idea that public schools are so unnatural now. And certainly when you look at what the model was traditionally in this country, the one-room schoolroom, the community schools and this sort of thing, now it does seem like the entire larger system is breaking down. I mean, a lot of people who I think scoffed at homeschooling, especially before COVID, are turning to it now. And this seems to be mirrored in American society generally, like the large-scale systems that everybody more or less took for granted. Everybody kind of knows that they just don't work as well as they used to. And obviously, the changing demographics is a big part of that. Do you expect that what you're trying to do here could eventually become a mass movement as more and more people look for an escape from a society that in many ways seems to be crumbling?
Yeah, I think that overall societal and technological trends will continue driving people our way. The 19th century saw increasing centralization because of industrialization. And there are economies of scale in distributing manufactured goods where people want to move into these very tightly defined models for how to run their business. It's not modular manufacturing, which is now more and more possible. Like some of the most sophisticated machining is now done in remote areas, and everything is shipped out to customers online. So with technology decentralizing economic opportunity and information, the physical landscape will ultimately come to reflect that, I believe. So America, the reason that we were so spread out is that we were a nation of yeoman farmers, and there was a lot of virgin land that we could go out and cultivate. So we started in this huge spread. And then there was that centralizing feature of industrialization, and that peaked in arguably the mid 20th century. And since then, with globalization and networks of commerce being intrinsically more decentralized, and then with the internet, we're just moving in one direction. So there's less faith in public institutions. And so going back to the beginning of the 20th century, there were all sorts of private associations, the Rotary Club, local bands, chess clubs, and people were very engaged. So in many ways, like institutionally, culture was less centralized. It centralized more and more until in the mid 20th century, you had only 3 television networks. Everyone was watching. You had a handful of major corporations that dominated culture. So we will, like what we experienced, mass American culture from the 50s through the 80s, we will never see again. And many people are expecting that, like that's the default. We're just going to get rid of all the, recent arrivals and go back to something like that America. But technologically, that was a result or a product of particular economic and technological factors. Those factors are changing. The nature of future communities will change. Also, ecological sustainability does have to be a consideration. Solar eventually will make more sense than diesel or gasoline for a lot of functions. And that's something that is, again, intrinsically decentralizing because solar farms need to take up a bunch of space. So, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things that are making it more and more possible. Like homesteading today, there are whole industries that you're tapping into, that you're taking advantage of. There's a pool of collected wisdom that's available at your fingertips. And now the taboo is breaking down. So I think things are really only headed in that direction. And then geopolitically as well, I do think we're going to see more of a multipolar world. I think non-state actors and unfortunately terrorist networks and things like that will be increasingly geopolitically relevant. John Robb, I think he was a general.
Yeah, Global Guerrillas, right?
Yeah, I was thinking of Brave New War is the book I read from him. But basically, he argues that smaller networks will have disproportionately larger access to destructive potential as technology increases.
Right.
So that works against the existence of these highly centralized state structures. There are countervailing forces as well. Of course, AI is sort of an intrinsically centralizing feature in some ways, and yet decentralizing in others. So like the server farms, only multi-billion-dollar corporations can afford to actually control the physical infrastructure of these things. And that is a kind of centralized bit of infrastructure. And yet AI technology empowers very small scale actors to come up with things that used to take huge crews. Like you can produce Hollywood level films and documentaries basically by yourself or the very small team. So I think it's not moving in only the decentralizing direction. There's going to be a pushback, right? There's going to be a clamping down, a centralizing, probably left-wing regime in the relatively near future. And I think ultimately it will fail. And then what comes after that will balance out to be something more sustainable. I think it's going to be more local and more akin in some ways to like ancient political philosophy, where Aristotle and Plato believed that the polis should be essentially the number of people that you can conceptualize.
Right.
So that's, yeah.
I think it's very interesting they brought up John Robb. I think Global Guerrillas is his website. And I've read a lot of his stuff too. And what is really interesting about it is that you see this with the idea of 4th generation warfare and what some have even called 5th generation, where the idea of a hierarchical, centralized, almost military way of conducting things, it just doesn't seem to work anymore. I mean, to some extent, you see this on the battlefield and things like Afghanistan, but more importantly, you see it in business. You see it in the emergence of industries like crypto. You see it in the way cultural production online, especially when you brought up AI. I think of what Emily Eucas was able to achieve with the Will Stancil show, which basically emerged out of nowhere and became like the big online thing. And of course, mainstream press was horrified by it. But I do think you're right that we are going to see a countervailing attempt to crack down, especially once President Trump is out. Do you think that they're going, what do you think that's going to look like? I mean, because I could expect them to try to control AI. I could expect them to try to just ban these things outright. I could expect them, frankly, to just do a full anarcho-tyranny thing where a bunch of non-whites just march in and law enforcement is just like, well, there's nothing we could do about it.
Yeah, I think that is very likely as well. It's an ancient tactic, like the Babylonians or the Assyrians, they disrupted local ethnic groups, like they migrated the Jewish elite into Babylon, right? Mm-hmm. That was so that the leadership wasn't there to mount any kind of resistance. If you're surrounded by aliens, you're kind of powerless to resist the state. You need, I think Max Weber commented on this as well. Like you need intermediate levels of association to defend between the individual and the state. Like the most individualist society becomes the most totalitarian. Ultimately, maximizing individual freedom actually takes away all defenses that local networks have against top-down authority.
Right. I think Juvenal says that too, and On Power. It's the reason liberation is sold is precisely because it empowers the government and the system more. Because the more you're liberated from like social ties, the more alone and powerless you actually are.
Yep. So I think, and a lot of left-wing ideology is about liberating the individual sexually or in terms of freeing them from the bonds of heritage, and like your past is irrelevant. Even their like philosophy of what the justice system is for. It's about kind of liberating the individual from their own karmic debt, I guess, in some sense.
Their nature,
Right. So I think what we're going to see will be very AI intensive. It's going to be an information war, a propaganda war. There's going to be a lot of censorship. And it's going to be pushing for more mass immigration. And I think there is still enough of an incentive for the third world to want to come here just economically, that even with an administration that wanted to shut down the border, I think the natural kind of entropy of the situation would be they want to come here. They want to come to Europe. There are economic motives. There are also genetic motives. Like the entire world is attracted to white women. This is an issue. So anyway, you're not going to be able to shut that down easily. And a Democrat administration would see that as guaranteed Democrat voters. So I have a hard time imagining that happening right now because we're in the middle of this kind of somewhat conservative or right-wing renaissance. But things change quickly. And, remember the transition from like 2016, early 2017 to post-Charlottesville and how everything was open. I mean, you could watch Hitler speeches on YouTube. You could watch Holocaust revision on YouTube. And then 2017, 2018, 2019, we were being censored for all sorts of things. 2020 with COVID, I mean, just common sense was like not allowed in public discourse. So it can happen fast. And usually how they do it is they do manufacture crises. And it's a more and more unstable world geopolitically. And so doing some kind of false flag seems more and more plausible. There's just a lot of factors pushing towards chaos. And it's going to be chaos precipitating some kind of centralized pushback. And again, ultimately, I think it will fail. There's no way to predict the particulars there. I also don't, it's like hard for me to imagine a left-wing leader at this point because there are no charismatic individuals in the Democrat Party. No one has that draw. No one, I can't see them rallying around anyone. And then like even the right wing is fragmenting, and J.D. Vance, I think, will be the nominee. And there is a chance that he even wins. And whether Republicans win or Democrats win in the next election, I think will make a huge difference because like you're talking about, does this chaos happen now under this technological paradigm, or are we, almost a decade deep into AI world when that happens?
Right.
And those two scenarios are really, really different.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure what I want, honestly. Can we afford 4 years of our main antagonists having unbridled power? And then Israel fits in this in an, again, very uncertain way because they've kind of alienated their POC coalition and the Democrats. And yet all the establishment Democrats are still controlled by Israel. So did they just find a way to pivot and shift and turn that animus that's currently against Israel because of Gaza against like white people again? And they just go back to the old playbook? I saw a shift in a lot of Zionist Jews towards more pro-white rhetoric, white nationalist rhetoric. They did come our way, I think, because they realized like, okay, this is our last possible ally. And on paper, it kind of makes sense. You can get why, like even a typical conservative, someone like Jared Taylor was very amenable to possibly working with Jews in a pro-white sense because many of them look white, and it seemed like I was in that position for a while. I've had Jewish friends and I've liked a lot of Jewish people that I interacted with. And I thought, well, why can't they be part of some kind of pro-white movement? I'd certainly rather ally with a high IQ, high agency group that's going to benefit me than like a bunch of third world immigrants from shitholes. So like on paper, it seems like it should work. And yet it also seems like it's absolutely not working for them. So honestly, I totally give up any pretension that I can predict what exactly will go down. I think the best I can do is there will be some kind of chaos, either of a military nature or another, biohazard scenario or
Right.
a climate thing. I mean, there's just no telling. And then there will be that centralizing crackdown. It could even happen under a Republican administration.
It could.
I mean,
Yeah, very
it
easily
doesn't have
could.
to. Yeah.
I mean, technically, COVID kicked off under Trump's first term.
Exactly.
We don't really associate it with too much, but it was Trump who kind of started it.
That's right. It was his vaccine program, too.
Mm-hmm. One of the big questions, I think, in the movement right now is this idea of what is our relationship with the system that rules us? Because in some sense, we recognize that it's not really ours. In many ways, it's an occupying regime. But at the same time, like, we do have to deal with it. I mean, for most of us, we pay our taxes, we obey the laws as best we can, still vote, have some sort of a stake. A lot of people still vote anyway and say we have some sort of a stake depending on who's ruling us. And it's one thing to say, well, they're both controlled and it doesn't make a difference. But I mean, there's a pretty big difference just talking about like online speech between the second Trump administration and the Biden administration. I mean, like you used to not be able to get a bank account or use a checking account. Now you can. Like this is just something that happened with AMRAN. Mm-hmm. So like there is an actual difference that like really affects your everyday life. The question is, if you're developing an intentional community, which in some sense is separate from the larger society or the larger system, because that's the whole point. What is the relationship as you see it with the larger political system? And do you expect to be at a point where you can take over a part of it or vote your own guys in, or is the point to just be as free of it as possible?
I think that smaller firms are more agile and they come upon the new best practices and then they rapidly balloon to become the mainstream. So fighting over existing overly bureaucratic, inefficient systems isn't very appealing to me. I would rather, if we have the freedom to build our own alternative systems, I would rather invest basically fully in those and try to scale those. But at the same time, like I'm not going to not vote. I can go attend local Republican Party meetings. I can have a relationship with the mayor in town. I can, go and I think the local level of government is extremely important. And if these decentralizing tendencies do prevail, well, then we might see a world where your county sheriff is far more relevant to you than your state representative in Washington.
Right.
So I think investing more at the local level politically, but not refraining from participating in the national discourse or like state level politics either. Um, Basically, living in an intentional community is just living in a particular kind of neighborhood. And wherever you live, nowadays with the internet, you can participate. So it's not like living in an intentional community is totally alienating you from the political process. Really, it only opens up new possibilities because you now have a reliable voting bloc and a potential source of political organizing and a base of operations for outside political groups. So I think it just kind of expands options. However, ultimately, I'm just not that enthused about, taking over the Republican Party, because I think what comes next after the chaos, centralizing, and it failing is going to be totally new, because technology is changing that sufficiently. I think social dynamics are led by technological change. And AI and robotics is a huge game changer.
Yeah.
So, I think the social systems of the future will reflect that. I mean, in many ways, like the structure of our state from its founding was influenced by Prussian industrializing ideology, the way that our military works, the way that our education system works, and that industrial age has already basically come to an end. We're in the information age, and we haven't quite adapted as far as how we govern. Just think about how could a representational system of government work if it was based on a really efficient, high-tech social media platform? You could have it be more meritocratic. You could have testing built in. You could have complex feedback that is then filtered up to decision makers, because an intelligence agency isn't as efficient as an AI model that has access to all of your user data. So there's just a lot of things, like we've not even scratched the surface of what governance or politics or statecraft looks like in light of these new technologies. And it's an area that people are inherently reluctant to speculate on, just because many people have anxiety about humans being replaced by AI, robotics, etc. I am very pro AI and pro robotics. I want a drone factory. We should manufacture drones here on the land. And one day I kind of intend to. So, but by the time that's available, new opportunities that just haven't been thought of will be possible there as well. Like the old-fashioned drones, there'll be drone 5.0 out, and it'll be.
I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, right. But I mean, I think you're absolutely right in that the driving force in terms of culture, in terms of industry, in terms of the ways people are going to make money and where they can live. I mean, obviously, we saw with COVID, remote working is a lot more plausible than it seemed. I mean, I'm not even sure what the point of commercial real estate is in many cases now. All of these things are driving decentralization, and it seems like every trend is just pushing in that one direction. And this seems to be one of the best forms of social organization for taking advantage of that and serving the cause. So where can people find you? How can people get involved? And even if there are people are settled, they already have their house, they're happy where they are, how can they help?
Yeah, there are all sorts of opportunities to be involved. So even if you don't intend to move to a physical community, Return to the Land is also about the social network and the interest groups, as well as business opportunities. I've recently started a chat for business investment. I think if you pair controlling key local businesses with a few communities in an area, very quickly, you're kind of the most relevant force there politically. So wherever you live, there are opportunities. We have people all over the country. There are actually people all over the world in RTTL, Canada, Europe, Australia, a couple people down there. So there's definitely a role for you. There's the website, returntotheland.org. You can read about our various, how we operate and all that on our Substack. You can read a version of our operating agreement, our members agreement, articles of association. So we try to be very transparent, very open about how we do things. Our board of managers is up for election every 2 years. So it's not like this is my thing and it's always going to be what I say it is. Actually, I have very little power to unilaterally change anything. Everything is up to board votes. And I'm sure we'll refine and improve that structure over time. If you're a programmer, we definitely have a need for programmers to work on the website, web developers. If you're into, basically whatever job you're in, there's a role for that in building communities because we're interested in businesses, we're interested in a parallel society. So we try to be Big Tent. If you're Christian, if you're pagan, if you're agnostic, that's all fine. If you're like a Muslim, probably not. Sorry. It does have to be traditional European values and religion. But yeah, check us out on the website, returntoland.org. To apply, you fill out a questionnaire. You can use a pseudonym, so you don't have to necessarily dox yourself. It's usually a 15-minute interview, and then it's like a $25 lifelong membership fee that you pay, and then you're in the chats. And there are meetups pretty often regionally, and then the two big meetups at the land here in Arkansas, usually April and October. And those are really fun. You meet a lot of people and really like exceptional people with interesting backgrounds and ideas. So yeah, get involved.
All right. Well, Eric, thank you so much for everything you've been doing. And I know it's tough. I know like it gets annoying, not just the pressure of managing an organization, but also like the reporters constantly like trying to think of ways to trick you and all the rest of it. And I think you've handled it really well this year under a lot of very intense pressure. So congratulations.
Well, thank you.
I hope next year brings a lot more success for you. Thank
you, Kevin. It keeps it interesting. I mean, who wants to live a boring life, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I tell myself every morning. All right. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
So, TPUSA conference just happened. Probably have more to say about this soon, but let's look at the straw poll real quick. It's the best of times and the worst of times when you look at the results from this. Here's the best of times. About 90% of attendees favored an immigration moratorium for the United States. Now, this is a pretty big deal, given that this is what my old boss, Peter Brimlow, was advocating for many, many, many years. This was completely outside the Overton window. Even talking about it made you look crazy. Now it's mainstream. Now practically unanimous support among the leading youth conservative group. Little awareness among this, among Republican politicians. But the young people get it. And this has real momentum behind it. And then you look at this next one, this blast from the past here. What do they say is the number one threat facing America? Radical Islam. What does that even mean? This could have been said in 2002. In fact, I think it was, if you go back to like CPAC and old-timey conservative gatherings like that. And what happened? Under George W. Bush, Muslim immigration dramatically increased. We fought and lost some pointless wars. Now New York City is run by a Muslim. But it wasn't Sharia law. It wasn't the Muslim Brotherhood taking everything over. It wasn't the way like grassroots conservatives talk about this stuff. It was just Muslims became another growing population of resentful non-whites within the coalition of the oppressed that is our civilizational albatross. It's a demographic thing. It's not an ideological thing. Leave aside the idea that the Muslims are the ones with a disproportionate effect on American foreign policy. Obviously, they're not the main problem. They're an effect, not the cause. But still, Tucker Carlson, who talked about, we shouldn't discriminate against them. No, he's wrong. None of these people should be here, not one. And yeah, you're going to get various ideologies that come out of the population that could harm us, but that's all downstream of demographics. What is the plan here? We're going to educate these people out of their religion? No. No one assimilates. People recreate more or less the same kinds of societies wherever I go. And the same kind of values perpetuate themselves. So what are we supposed to take away from this? Where is the young right now? There's certainly growing awareness of the key issues among young conservative base, but what you don't have is explicit recognition that the nation is the people, and the people are the race. Without white identity, we're just kicking the can down the road. We're getting closer, but we're not there yet. And there is a time limit to all this. There comes a point where we just lose. We've got maybe 15 years left tops. And I hate to sound arrogant or self-important, but things like TPUSA and the conservative movement generally, these things matter only insofar as they help people get to our position. The end goal is white identitarianism. That is the only thing that is a real political and cultural force that could save our country and civilization. And unfortunately, people tend to come to this awareness in stages. They don't get it all at once. The good news is you see it happening with the conservative movement right now, just very slowly. The bad news is that many in Conservatism Inc. see it too, and they're trying to stop it. And this is why you see this hysterical gatekeeping by people like Ben Shapiro and Vivek Ramaswamy right now. And I'm not going to bluster and tell you, well, it's not going to work. They can't stop it. The youth are with us. Frankly, it might work. And the battle's here. Victory is not guaranteed. But I will tell you this, and I can say this with absolute certainty. We, the white right, are the future of the American right. End of America itself, or there is no future. Either we win or everybody loses. I'll see you next time.